Hey everybody, Steven here, and today, a different type of video. I'm going to be looking at the Gigabyte G32QC monitor and comparing it to the Samsung G5. So one of the questions I've been asked a lot is, should someone choose the Gigabyte over the Samsung G5 or vice versa? So we're just going to do the comparison. At first I was like, hey, I'm going to buy this monitor, and then I realized I actually already I did an unboxing video for this. Never followed up with a review because the monitor actually died 3 days after having it, and at the time, because it had just launched, I couldn't get it replaced from Newegg, and then Amazon actually didn't have any, so kind of just never came back around to it. But with this, I have used it, at least with this. I'm just not kind of doing it out of thin air, but it's just going to be easier for me to kind of talk everybody through these comparisons, and then you guys can make ultimately this decision for yourself. So let's start with the price. They're both listed for $369.99, and right now on Amazon they are discounted to $349.99. So that's going to apply to both of these. So the price is the same. With this, they're both 32 inches. They both have the PPI, or pixels per inch, of 93. That's standard for any monitor that's 32 inches and is 1440p, which both of these are 1440p. They both have a 1 millisecond MPRT response time. That's the motion picture or moving picture response time there. But let's kind of get into this. They both have FreeSync Premium Pro, but let's start getting kind of into these differences now. So with the Gigabyte here, one of the big differences is that the stand, it has height adjustment to it. The Samsung does not. You can only tilt this. So not only can you tilt the Gigabyte monitor, but you can also do the height adjustment to that. I think that's going to be a big one for a lot of people. I personally like a monitor that has height swivel tilt. Now mine's on an arm right now, so it's one of those things where I went ahead and purchased that. So whatever monitor I have, it has the ability to do that. But for those that aren't going to make that extra investment, something to keep in mind that this one actually has that, where the Samsung does not. I do also want to mention that both of these, by the way, are VA panels. The next big difference is that this has a 1500R curve, right? So when you look at curves, you have flat, you go 1800R, 1500R, and now with the Samsung, they're jumping to the 1000R curve. And the 1000R curve is going to match from what they've been saying. And if you watch any of Linus Tech Tip videos, he's kind of dug a little bit through that and just mentioned in one of his videos that there are there's research to back the fact that that 1000R curve really matches the curve of your eye. So viewing angles are really good if you're dead on. Not something that you're going to want to be off to the side with that. Here we go. So flat 1800R curve, and then the 1000R curve. The 1500R curve is going to be obviously in between that 1000 and that 1800R curve. So that's the next difference with that. Next one I want to look at is going to be the coloring here. So with the coloring, and on Samsung's website, you have to, I actually had to email them. I talked about this in one of my videos, where it's just not kind of put out there with this. It took a little bit of digging to actually find. But with the Samsung G5, it is 125% of the sRGB scale. The Gigabyte here is going to be 124% right there, so one less percent. And then it is 94% of the DCI P3 color scaling. And the Samsung G5 doesn't go by that. It goes by the NTSC scale. And that is 90% of the NTSC scale for the G5. If you kind of try to do the comparison, essentially take 4% away from the DCI P3, whatever that is, that's what it would be as a close comparison to the NTSC color scaling here. So essentially, they're pretty much the same. Even if I'm just looking at the sRGB, are you going to notice 1 less percent? Probably not, right? Next thing, brightness. Brightness with this on the Gigabyte, it does get brighter. So we have 350 right here. If we hop over to the G5 here, you're going to have 20 or 250 brightness, typical, right? They're both saying typical on this. So minimum brightness 200, typical brightness is going to be 250. Hopping back over here, brightness 350. So it will get a little bit brighter. That's kind of reinforced with the contrast ratio, 3000 to 1 on the Gigabyte versus the 2500 to 1 for the static contrast ratio here, right? So colors are going to look a little bit better on the Gigabyte because of that. And just kind of trying to remember what it was like when I was playing on it. I do remember that the colors were solid with the monitor after you tinker with it. And that's not to take away from the G5. I think it's okay. And it does have really good colors. That's something that I talked about with the review. It's not going to be as good as the G7, for instance, but it's still pretty solid if you spend the time to tinker around with it. It was something that got brought up in the review. If you have a Sony PlayStation 5, this for the G5 or the Gigabyte, it's just not going to work because it doesn't support 1440p natively. Now, Sony has mentioned, hey, we're going to try to actually do a software update where we can support that. I'm just curious why they didn't kind of right out of the gate, but they are saying that they're going to try to do a software update. So yeah, maybe down the road, but anybody looking right now, I don't recommend it. I don't want you guys to have to play in 1080p, or with some of these, I know there's the ability to upscale to 4K, but it's not native 4K. So I would not get either monitor. Now, if you have an Xbox Series X, either of these are going to be a good option for you with this. Looking at the two, and it's something that didn't dawn on me, I wish I covered in the review, is that yes, you can tweak some color settings with the G5, but really when I'm looking at how I got mine to where it was with my review, if anybody, and that's another question, is like, hey, what are your color settings and things like this? I do them on the panel, and you're kind of limited with the G5. The Overdrive Sidekick, or was it ODS or OSD? The software that you get with Gigabyte that's built into the monitor, it was pretty solid. I would say they're both pretty solid in that regard. And you can tinker around with the coloring on the G5, but when you open up the Nvidia control panel, adjust desktop color settings, this is where I do my settings here. Increasing digital vibrancy, changing my gamma, my contrast, my brightness, really getting this to the exact settings that I want, where even with the new consoles, as far as I know, you can't do it to that degree. So something else to keep in mind. If I'm going to choose between the two on that, I'm probably going to go potentially with the Gigabyte over the G5 on that one. So we have the brightness and the contrast ratio are going to be better on the Gigabyte. Dynamic contrast ratio, 12 million to 1. And this is where Samsung kind of, and I've noticed it with their website, certain things are like hidden, like looking right now, there's certain things that I had to, for the sRGB scale, I had to actually contact the company to get this. How they label this right here, HDR10, but it's HDR 600. It has HDR10, meaning 10 bits of color, but it's 600 nits. So when you actually tinker with that, you're going to have more nit brightness than the Gigabyte. That's something where maybe you have the Xbox Series X, maybe you're going to be playing games in HDR. This would be a better option for you with that. But what they do here is they use this lingo, mega DCR. So it's mega dynamic contrast ratio. They don't give you a number. Now Gigabyte does. It's 12 million to 1. the dynamic contrast ratio. If I had to guess, Samsung is pretty close. It's somewhere in that ballpark, right? Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. Display colors, 8 bits. That's going to be the 16.7 million colors, which the Samsung G5 here, that has the same, right? Color support max 16.7 million. That's 8 bits of color. 1 millisecond response time. We talked about that. That's that moving picture or motion picture response time. So that is not the same as G to G, gray to gray. Gray to gray is quicker. Complaints that I'm seeing with this are going to be ghosting. For either monitor, I'm going to see the complaint of some level of ghosting because of this, because it's not that gray to gray response time, right? Which is a difference in the pixel response time or not. So they're both going to look the same in that regard. Refresh rate, you have 165 hertz with the Gigabyte versus 144 with the G5 here. Is that going to be right there? Oops. Is the extra, what do you get? Is that 16, 21 extra frames that you get with that? Is that worth it? Are you going to notice the extra 21 frames? Probably not. These are more budget friendly monitors. I don't know if there's going to be like competitive FPS players out there that are wanting any edge that are going to need that extra 21 frames. If you're playing on a console, you're going to be locked at 120 anyway, so that doesn't matter for you. For the average person, 144 is my gold standard personally. 120 is solid, but 144 just is a little bit smoother. Now, day-to-day is where you may notice a subtle difference, very, very subtle, with just opening and closing apps. That's going to be the big one where you may notice something. Other than that, unless you just have an insane rig, you're probably not even going to hit the full 144 or 165 with AAA games. Keep that in mind, right? If you're playing other things that aren't as graphically demanding, then yeah, you'll hit that. If I'm playing Doom Eternal, the difference between the 144 and the 165, honestly, I'm not going to notice it. So we have that. VESA display HDR 400. So this is HDR 400. The G5 is HDR 600. So it just has that extra 200 nits of brightness. So with that, for me, and this is something that I talked about in the review, these both have DisplayPort 1.2. So as far as I knew, you couldn't actually do HDR because the bandwidth wasn't there. But I guess the way they're doing these is just because it's kind of vague with the definition of what constitutes DisplayPort 1.4. They actually have these where their bandwidth is there and they can do HDR. And so that's what is going on here. They're labeling it the DisplayPort 1.2, but it has the ability to actually still do HDR with this. It was the easiest setup I've had on the G5 of any monitor that I've used. HDR is just something I don't use that often. It's just in its infancy. And I think for console players, or if you're going to use an Xbox on it, it would be a better bet potentially to go with the G5 if you're wanting the HDR. It's just, I don't know. For PC players, it's just not widely supported yet. So I'd say wait on that, because by the time you're actually consistently seeing this show up in games, you're probably going to have monitors on the market at that point that are going to be 1,000 nits, 2,000 nits, right? And it's just going to look a lot better. Flicker free, they both have that. I don't know if it shows it on this, but they both do have the flicker free with this. I don't think it's going to show that on that. Ooh, you catch this right here? They are lying. Within Odyssey's gray to gray 1 millisecond response time. That is not true. Right there, MPRT. They are lying. Once again, I don't know how I would report that, but this is where I think sometimes there's miscommunication between Samsung and this is on their store. And what they're putting out there. Not a fan of that. Earphone jack, they're both going to have that. They do have HDMI 2.0. This one has 2 ports where the Samsung only has the one. And does it tell me height adjustment 100 millimeters? This is VESA mountable 100 millimeters by 100 millimeters. The G5, don't know if it has it on here, 75 by 75, although when I did mine, make sure that if you do get an ARM, it has the ability to do 75 or 100. So I switch out my monitors, and that is a huge plus for me. I didn't get a DP cable when I got my G5, but somebody actually, and I mentioned that in the review, let me know that theirs actually came with one. So maybe mine was just a fluke and it didn't have that. This also comes with extra USB ports. It has 2 USB 3.0 ports. The G5 does not, right? Not like the G7 that actually has 2 USB ports. So, and I mentioned that they're both FreeSync Premium. So with this, it is boiling down to what do you want? I think the Gigabyte, the huge plus for this monitor, yeah, it has extra refresh rate, the 165 hertz with it, and that's kind of a in-between thing. I don't think you need to make the decision solely off that. Bigger ones, though. The height adjustable stand is a huge plus if you're not going to mess with an arm. Otherwise, if your G5 isn't where you want it in terms of a viewing angle, you're going to have to buy something to prop it up on, or you're going to have to make the investment with a monitor arm. So I think the height adjustment is really awesome. I do like the fact that it has the extra USB ports on it. That's a huge plus for me just because I end up using so many on my PC. I kind of get capped. I like that with this. I think the look of it is pretty solid. Looking at the back here, I mean, neither one is going to be necessarily spectacular because it is the budget-friendly version of their other monitors, right? Gigabyte, this being off the, what is it, the Tough monitors that they have. It's kind of like a budget-friendly version of those, I guess. So I'd say those two, if you're weary of the 1000R curve, but you still want a curve, 1500R is solid with this. And I think this, because it has the higher brightness and contrast ratio, I think the colors are going to be really, really good on this, and it's just going to get a little bit brighter if that's a concern for you. So I think those are the big ones to go with this monitor. Now, looking at the G5, 144 hertz solid. Like I said, if you're a console player, like you're locked in at 120 anyways. If you are into HDR 600 is going to be better on this than it is for the HDR 400 on the Gigabyte. If you're interested in the 1000R curve, and it may take a second to get used to, but I've actually switched back to an 1800R curve monitor, which is what I'm using right now. I was blown away after using the Samsung for the last 1 or 2 months. It's very noticeable now, going back to a monitor that has less of a curve. I actually miss it. I miss the 1000R curve with that. So those are going to be 2 big ones that the Samsung is going to have here. And also just looking at what are potentially the aesthetics that you're looking for with your monitor. I don't think aesthetics are everything, but something to keep in mind. Neither have RGB lighting or anything like that. So HDR, the 1000R curve, I think that's going to be the bigger draw for the G5 here. The Gigabyte is going to be the extra USB ports, the height adjustable stand, potential better contrast ratio, and the lighting versus with the G5. You're looking at the better HDR and slightly better color accuracy. I'd kind of say that's a wash with that. So hopefully that helps anybody that is kind of on the fence of which one should I get. Like I said, it boils down to those little bit of extras and differences between the two Pick the one that just jumps out to you the most out of those. I will say with the Gigabyte, somebody mentioned in the comments, when you go to buy this, where is it? Says packaging, show what's inside. To hide it, choose ship in Amazon packaging at checkout. People have mentioned the panel showing up broken because it just ships in the box. And whoever's shipping it, USPS, UPS, FedEx, whoever, they're probably not going to care. They're just throwing this thing around. So if you choose that option when you check out on Amazon, less likely that it's going to come busted. These are both LED panels, by the way. Blacklight bleed's going to be very similar. Just want to touch on that. And when you look in the features with this, like the stuff like aim assist and all that other stuff, that's kind of standard across all of these. So that's going to be in the OSD Sidekick. You can turn on some of those features. So like I said, hopefully that helps. If there's anything that I didn't answer directly, let me know in the comment section. And if you do end up getting this monitor, let me know what you guys think. I always like seeing like, hey man, I bought this because of your review or your unboxing and I really like it. Or if there's something else going on with it. I'm definitely not a tech support guy. I'm not at that level yet, but I will do my best with this. I know one of the things mentioned was how do you enable HDR? So I might do a video on that. But that's going to be it for this video, everybody. If you like the video, hit the like button for me. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. Thanks so much for watching.